So, Aly, I want to transition here to the next topic. You had experience with the DSA and with Force to Vote. So you want to let us know about the experience you had?
Yeah, so honestly, I was not involved really with DSA at all, but I had experienced them in the summer with just everything with Black Lives Matter and kind of how they coordinated in Chicago here. So I knew a few people that were in it, and basically I just wanted to understand more why they weren't backing Force to Vote, because that's like one of their main platforms is Medicare for All. So I joined because I wanted to know, and it was actually relatively easy to kind of find out what was going on. And long story short, and you can check out all these articles on my Substack, by the way, but I found out that a lot of the leadership was actually not into it, not because of the fact that it was Medicare for All, just it was more about the tone that it was coming from. Like a lot of like Jimmy Dore hate. Obviously people in DSA were not into that, and so like they would spend their time talking about, you know, this is a bad strategy, and kind of just it's that petty bourgeoisie class just like kind of at the top of DSA. And a lot of them, their own members, were coming at them saying, why aren't you doing anything? Why aren't you even talking about it? They wouldn't vote on it, and by the time they finally did vote on it, the national chapter still wasn't into it. So I know I'm kind of, again, going all over the place with that, but long story short, DSA was more focused on furthering their own agenda because it abides by certain requirements that DSA has to have in order to back a movement. And at the end of the day, they did not want to back Force to Vote because they thought promoting the People's Party. If it's not going to siphon people into DSA itself, DSA won't back it. And I thought that was just pretty interesting. And I thought that, you know, their own members should know that, like, because they didn't even know what was going on. So like, what is it, DSA? Are you more concerned about getting more memberships then? Or are you actually concerned about supporting this movement in any capacity? And the level of defense and interference that a lot of these people in these calls I was listening to were running for AOC was astounding. And again, that goes back to, you can't back it unless the leaders are backing it. And they're not going to back it unless it meets these requirements of like pushing unions, which is fine, you know, for what it's worth, but they refuse to really kind of think outside of the box. So they have met since this all came out, and they've tried coming up with different strategies, like so that this doesn't happen again. But at the end of the day, the root problem wasn't really solved, which is that unless, you know, like they cannot back a movement unless it's going to get more members for DSA. And I just think that's a really selfish way to go about it. I mean, there's so many other things I could go into, but that's just a general idea of what happened with DSA.
Yeah, they need to remember it's not about them; it's about helping the people.
Right.
Like that's
right.
But yeah, they're on survivorship for their own organization, and it's selfish.
Yeah, and actually there are a few people from like the national, not way at the top, but definitely in that realm from DSA contacting me. I mean, I figured it was only a matter of time because I didn't really make them look good. And then obviously like Jimmy Dore used the article and I was like, oh God, because his reach is huge. And there were a couple that wanted to understand my point of view. And I told them, but I didn't want to like really go on phone calls with them because then I saw a lot of those types of people starting to then trash Jimmy Dore and then go into how all of it's just like a big operation to siphon people into the People's Party. And it's like, well, once again, no one's getting help. We're arguing about, you know, really petty things. It was just unfortunate to see like all the members that actually put in the work, because DSA on a local level, they're really effective. They operate, you know, differently than the national chapter, but it's more just like that organization and how it works is not, it doesn't match the image that they try to put out there for the world. And I think that just really bothers me because it's really disingenuous. And those are the types of people like that, you know, those top leaders that would look down on me for talking to somebody that's not, you know, exactly in line with how they think. That's the type of person that they motivate me to do this kind of stuff, because that's selfish. That's not, you really don't care about helping other people. You just want to subscribe to whatever it is that you think. You're not open to hearing other people. And that's just pretty like vapid people. I don't have any, you know, patience for that. So I'm glad it exposed that, but I'm also happy that in a way, the DSA's own members, like on a local level, did get together after this and, tried to formulate some changes. So we'll see what happens.
Can I ask a question?
This exposure keeps happening with the people that are in the boutique left. Like, you can't talk to those people. How do you expect to raise their consciousness? How do you expect them to understand why you are for positions if you don't talk to them?
Right.
And now with Force to Vote also exposing AOC, this recent thing that happened with the Capitol and her lying about where she was, that's exposing her. But yeah, Go ahead, Pearce. I haven't talked to you about Force to Vote. So go ahead and ask the question, and then I want to hear from you what your thoughts are on Force to Vote.
Sure. I have a friend, I talk to her every day, and she's in DSA, and I just want a clarifying question, and then I think maybe we should bring in Joe because I feel like I'm talking too much. But I wanted to ask the clarifying question. Are we talking about the split amongst local DSA chapters with their national chapter as coming from the Jimmy Dore Force to Vote AOC thing? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, you could say that's part of it, yeah. Because that definitely happened as well. A lot of their own members were like, well, I'm done paying you, because they wanted to support it. So, and again, like, I differentiate the national chapter with all the local chapters, because I have friends that are, they're putting the work in. They themselves were asking why it wasn't happening, because they were, if anything, were more frustrated. They couldn't get an answer. So
you said that's part of it, like the Jimmy Dore AOC Force to Vote thing is part of it. What is the other part? I'm just asking for myself as a
I would say, no, just like for the split, I would say a lot of it is just honestly like communication and organization, like the way that they say it's a democratically run organization, but it's not, because at the end of the day, the people at the tip top are the ones, deciding. You might have an idea or you might vote on something. It doesn't mean anything's gonna happen. Like with the Force the Vote vote that did take place, like within DSA, the people, it was like the vote was like 20 to 6, maybe 18 to 6, and that was in favor of backing Force the Vote. And the national, the people at the top still said no. So
it's basically going the route of like labor unions, where the leadership is closer to the Democratic Party and the people in the actual organizations are the people that want the revolution.
Right.
Yeah, I'll speak on this stuff like later if you guys want me to just add my 2 cents on that, but I don't know if Joe has anything he wants to say.
Yeah, I was going to ask Joe, you were a prominent voice at the event that I went to in DC with a whole bunch of other people. It was an amazing event. So where do you see the future of Force to Vote? I don't see it as a loss at all, because it exposed AOC and the squad, first of all. Second of all, it shows that we are very united, and we took action to go to DC, and there was thousands of people that wished that they could have gone, but they couldn't. There was a petition that had like 40,000 plus people that signed on to it. Jimmy Dore had a whole bunch of people watching his live stream on Force to Vote. So where do you see Force to Vote going in the future?
I think we need more Force to Vote rallies. I think we need more of that activity. And I think it needs to be more than just the first full weekend in January right near the buildings of the House of Representatives. I think every major city needs to have Force to Vote rallies. I think every major city needs to have them. And this is something that I spoke about on Jackson's show a while back. I am all for feet in the streets and having people being active, but I'm also for policy. And there's precedent for Medicare for all. I mentioned, everybody knows about this, the situation in Lincoln County, Montana, where 3 cities, Libby, Eureka, and Troy, ended up getting Medicare for all because of a vermiculite mine, ended up poisoning everybody in the county, and everybody got Medicare for all for the rest of their lives. I am a firm proponent of having feet in the streets, but I also like policy to support the feet in the streets. So what I would like to see happen is not only people on the street saying, hey, force the vote, but I would also like to see our politicians trying to get Joe Biden to use Section 1881 Alpha of the Social Security Act to make sure that everybody gets Medicare for all. Now, Section 1881 Alpha of the Social Security Act basically says that everybody who has a health problem as a result of an environmental exposure gets Medicare for all. Now, it was written specifically for the people in Lincoln County, Montana, but I would certainly think it could be written. And it also in that act, it also allows for other pilot programs to be created based upon the particular situation. So right now we have an environmental hazard that's taking place in the United States. It's an airborne virus, the coronavirus. So if people in Lincoln County, Montana could go ahead and get Medicare for all, I don't understand why the rest of the United States can't get Medicare for all. And that's something that Joe Biden could do right now. He could get a pen, sign it into law. Everybody gets Medicare for all. And even if he didn't want to give everybody, he could just go ahead and say, we're just going to go ahead and cover COVID patients. But it will be silly to just cover COVID patients, because if you cover just COVID patients, you would have to cover everybody else that didn't get COVID to make sure that everybody is taken care of. So he's just better off just going ahead and giving everybody Medicare for all. And I don't want to hear, oh, well, how are we going to pay for it? Because we always figure out ways to pay for other stuff that's less important.
And the wars,
we pay for wars. We should be able to pay for Medicare for all for everybody. And there's proof that Medicare for all, that Medicare is actually more effective and it saves money in the long run. So if it's more effective and it saves money in the long run, why don't we do it?
Right. And I like that, because why? I want them to answer why. Sorry to cut you off, but then they'd have to be honest.
The logic of neoliberalism doesn't care about the long-term survival of the species. It cares about the short-term profits of the people that run the system, the capitalists. Not to keep harping the same, fucking horn, but
it's true.
And you were saying that you want more force to vote. I think that force to vote is useful insofar that it's like you can see who's just grandstanding. But I think for that exact reason, that's why that's why politicians do not allow more kind of forced to vote situations, because like the GameStop Wall Street thing, then we would all see through the curtain that these people are not our friends. These people are not going to help us.
The politicians aren't going to help us either. And they've shown that they're not our friends either.
Right.
And what's even worse about all of this is the blind idolatry that people seem to have for our politicians. AOC has a following that rivals the fervor of Beyonce, where you can't even think about saying anything about AOC, or AOC's posse comes after you. And I think people need to understand that we cannot idolize our politicians. We should not be fans of politicians, because if the politicians realize that the constituents are their fans, then the politicians will treat us like fans. And fans is short for fanatics. And we are not crazy people, the stuff that we are asking for. The stuff that we are asking for is quite honestly stuff that we should have already had.
Yeah, and what they ran on. So that's all you're doing.
And
you're
what they said they were going to do.
Yeah, so I love it, because it one day, my hope is that it will. Because you think about it, you're like, yeah, why won't you just, sign that executive order? Why can't we have this? And that would force them to get to the point where they have to say, well, it's because I'm getting funding from this health company. Like, that's who's funding them. That's all it is. It always goes back to the money. So I want more force the vote on anything that somebody runs on, because it's going to back them into a corner. This is like me wishful thinking, but it backs them into a corner to eventually have to explain how this really works. And that it's not really they say things that make you feel good, but they keep showing you over and over. They don't have any intention of doing that. It's like, I kind of feel like on this topic, I'm beating a dead horse, because it's like they show who they are. This is who they are. A politician is going to be a politician. So, I understand a lot of people are, especially like with AOC, are having a hard time coming to terms with the squad. They lied, but because that's what a politician does. I hate to say it, but I don't look at many heroes and see politicians. So it's like you keep saying, we can't idolize them. You got to see reality for reality. And the reality is that health insurance companies fund all kinds of campaigns. They love Nancy Pelosi. They love Joe Biden. So why in the hell would we think that they're going to just do that right away, unless they're really pressured into it?
I want to add a little bit of something about the DSA thing. Just closing off, basically what you're saying is the logic that would make force to vote useful, or rather, I guess I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I was trying to say was the logic that would make force the vote useful is why we don't get forced to vote, which then makes it useless. But another thing that makes it useless is, like Joe was saying, like we're depending on politicians to, bring us the good things. On the DSA note, I will just say that there's an interesting book that coined the term nonprofit industrial complex, where it's basically talking about how it doesn't really matter what you name your organization, like Democratic Socialists of America. The way that capitalism has set up, and I know I'm beating a dead horse by constantly making capitalism the bad guy, but it really is you have to set up your revolutionary, your action-oriented, your pro-people organizations in a kind of business framework inside the framework of capitalism, already hindering its effectiveness, because you have to structure your nonprofits and your non-government organizations to serve the logic of capitalism, because like these nonprofits and these NGOs and these organizations of people that want to overthrow capitalism, like DSA members want to do, it's like you're working in a system that's set up within a framework that you're trying to overthrow. Basically, what I'm trying to say is DSA is a subsystem of capitalism being the super system of the subsystem of DSA. And you already hinder yourselves by trying to be an organization within a capitalist framework that is just there to address its contradictions. Like, that's the only reason why nonprofits and NGOs exist in the Western capitalist framework. It's because you can't monetize it. So there has to be some organization that makes everybody feel good, where it's like, well, all this bad stuff's happening because of capitalism, so let's make a nonprofit for it. Let's make an NGO for it. And let's focus on the victims of capitalism as opposed to the people that are perpetuating it. Like, like there are plenty of organizations that are, for Palestinian liberation, the NGOs and nonprofits that are associated with it are constantly looking at how those people, those Palestinians are living, how they could, make their communities flourish even better, as opposed to just looking up at power and being like, it's the IDF, it's the Israeli government that's fucking you. Like, the only thing that any NGO and nonprofit that wants Palestinian liberation should be talking about is these people are being fucked by the government and the military, and that structure needs to end. You're not supposed to, freaking talk to Palestinians about how they can bring in investment into their communities and, set up companies that draw investment from the Israeli government. Like, that's not how change happens. You're trying to make good things happen within a bad framework.
Right, but and David, something that you probably don't know. One of my master's degrees is in nonprofit management. So I've actually had to study nonprofits, and there's some stuff I agree with you with, and there's some stuff that I disagree with you with. But I think a lot of nonprofits don't understand what they're actually supposed to be doing. They don't understand their mission and vision statements, and they don't. And when a lot of nonprofits, specifically NGOs, and there's a wonderful documentary you can watch about the nonprofit industrial complex. It's called Poverty Inc. Poverty Inc. And it shows you how truly ineffective a lot of these NGOs are, because in many instances, these NGOs don't have a strategic plan that, and one of my professors told me this about 4 years ago, that works themselves into redundancy.
Yeah.
So what happens? So what you have in the nonprofit industrial complex is you have NGOs that do just enough to keep themselves in business, but they never actually solve any problems. The whole objective to be an NGO or a nonprofit is, another professor told me this, is to do the greatest number of good for the greatest number of people. That's the whole purpose of a nonprofit. Greatest number of good to the greatest number of people. And in many...
I just want to say, I love what you said, nonprofits having to keep themselves in business. You use the language of capitalism. I'm like, where's the money coming from? Is it from investment or from, donors and their
there are 9 ways that nonprofits can get capital, found through foundations, in-kind donations, fee for service, investment income. There's bequeathments, wills. There's 9 ways. I can't remember them off the top of my head.
It definitely sounds like a coupling of systems that for-profit organizations already use.
Well, no, because for the biggest difference between nonprofits is nonprofits can't raise capital. You can't have stockholders in a nonprofit organization. Corporations can raise capital and raise capital easily. So that's the biggest difference between the two. But in terms of organizational structure, sure, there are plenty of similarities between for-profit businesses and nonprofits. There's plenty of similarities, but the major difference between the two, other than the profit-driven aspect of it, is what I just said a couple of seconds ago. But in many instances, these nonprofit organizations don't have a strategic plan to work into redundancy. So their goals, like you said, David, a couple of minutes ago, for example, with Israel, their goals are relatively short-sighted. They're looking at treating the illness and not looking at the symptoms. So that's and we see, and quite honestly, their governments are nonprofits. And I think a lot of people don't always understand that. Governments are nonprofits. The major difference between a government and a nonprofit is a private institution that serves the public. The government is a public institution that serves the public.
So, Joe, do you mean that they're too focused on the symptom instead of looking at the entire illness?
That's exactly my point, Frank. That's exactly my point. And that's when you watch Poverty Inc., you'll realize, man, you know what? There's a lot of these NGOs that are just hanging around. And let's say they'll go to Haiti, for example, or you'll go to the Central African Republic, or you'll go to Asmara, Eritrea, or Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, or you'll go to the Kakuma refugee camp in northwestern Kenya. And the same people that were there 30 years ago had come back now, and they're doing the same stuff they did 30 years later.
Yeah,
and it's like, wait a minute, better. It's like if you were interested in actually solving the problem, you would come up with a solution in your SMART goals and your strategic plan to actually fix the problem, rather than keep the problem going enough so you have a job.
Yeah, Tony watches closely. Thank you so much for the tip, brother. Prime example of that, Joe,
yes, sir.
Pearce and Aly, is the Sunrise movement, right? And how they've been like these NGOs are co-opted. What has the Sunrise movement done like efficiently to try to? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna say actually it would be interesting to hear you debate the friend of mine, Jose. So. He was actually on the Chicago corner. He was handling that before myself. So he was always references the Sunrise movement. We have some interesting talks because we don't really agree on anything, but we get along well.
In the Sunrise movement?
Oh yes. Yes.
I mean, there's that.
He was active in it.
I don't know too much about them, to be quite honest.
Well,
they're very environment people.
Yeah, like, they're very focused on the environment.
That one female. Oh yeah, I know who you're talking about now.
Yeah, they. I mean, then again, this is nothing against the people in it, et cetera, et cetera. It's just like the strategy. How do I tie this back? Pretty much think about how quickly they organized, and think about again their poster girl AOC bringing up the Green New Deal. and Greta
Thunberg.
Greta, yeah.
And 350.org. Both of them don't do shit. They've been co-opted also.
Oh, yeah.
Bobby Yeager has exposed them so many times, like their financial ties to these billionaires whose interests aren't in actually saving the environment because they want to maximize profit. And in order to do that, they need to overexploit resources.
Yeah, so they're going to make bank.
Yeah, I think it's a way too of like sponging up. It's like sponging up what people want to do by talking about it as opposed to doing anything about it.
Well, yeah, it goes back to like, oh, they're so good. They're doing it. Like, look at Greta. She's handling it. No, she's not.
It's like, no, I wouldn't trust that these people got it. Like,
no, it's just more like, to go back to like Jose was saying, like, if you wanted force the vote to work, you should do something like how the Sunrise movement coordinates. And I'm just like, okay, we're not going to go anywhere good with this conversation. Right. Just like, I don't know.
What I'll say for people, look up Cory Morningstar's articles and look up Max Blumenthal's article on the green billionaires. I forgot the exact name of it, but he was exposing Naomi Klein, Josh Fox, Bill McKibben, exposing all these fake environmental activists and how they have close ties to these billionaires.
Yeah,
and they would be out of business if they actually solved the problem of climate change. If they were actually doing anything to combat the environmental destruction that's happening. Like there's climate change, and then there's also environmental destruction.
Yes.
Yes. And there's a lot of money in that industry, and a lot of people that are that have been waiting to get rich by constructing all these new infrastructures that are green. I'm not saying that's a bad thing that we're going, more green, but again, I always go back to like the World Economic Forum, like the UN. They've been planning this for a long time. People had some money that's, there's a lot of money in this. So it's co-opting a movement that started with a good intention.
Right.
And then they get involved.
Right. One other thing that I wanted to say about the whole nonprofit situation, because I want to make sure that everybody kind of gets this, because it's important. If government was actually doing what they were supposed to be doing and actually serving the people, we wouldn't have nonprofits. We wouldn't have a need for charity. Because, and I said this to one of my professors years ago, and we had a rather spirited discussion about this in class. And I said, Professor, really nonprofits are just outsourced government agencies.
Yes.
And Professor Lee looked at me and was like, well, what do you think? And then I explained why. And you can take a look, and and there's plenty of literature you can read about this. The history, a lot of your major nonprofits got their start around the time of the Reagan administration, around 1980. Why? Because Reagan cut a lot of social programs that were actually helping and serving people. So there's an inverse relationship to the decline of government services and an increase in nonprofit organizations. And we've seen that through at least from 1980 on. You're seeing more nonprofits because government services get cut. There was also a major spike in the creation of nonprofits during the Bill Clinton administration. Why? Because Bill Clinton took a sledgehammer to the AFDC program, the Aid for Families with Dependent Children program. He cut health care for kids. He reduced food stamp benefits for needy families. So if government was doing their job, and a government is we the people, it says so, it's us. If government was doing what they were supposed to be doing, we wouldn't have nearly as many nonprofits. Quite honestly, we wouldn't have charities. Because what are our tax dollars paying for? They're paying for these government services that the government decides to cut and pay for other stuff like the military. But if they actually invested in social programs, like making sure that we have an environment, or making sure everybody has a home, or making sure everybody has enough to eat, we wouldn't have places, we wouldn't have Habitat for Humanity. We wouldn't have maybe a UNICEF. If we weren't putting all of this money into the military industrial complex, we probably wouldn't have a United Nations. We wouldn't have Doctors Without Borders, because everybody would have healthcare.
That's a good point.
100%. All right. So you guys want to have any final words to say about this topic, about nonprofits, or about forced to vote? Like, where do we go from here?
We can move on, but I mean, isn't it like bedtime for you guys soon?
It's approaching there. Yeah, I was just going to address one last thing. So Real Talk brings up a good point. It says the issue with Rockfin is you're preaching to the converted. The message doesn't reach the wider audience. Yeah, it is. Yeah, the thing is, I was having issues with Rockfin and with multi-streaming, like streaming on YouTube and streaming on Rockfin at the same time. I'm going to figure that out. The thing is, I was streaming on here today to test it out, and also because of what